You opened the conversation to delete it. That was the plan. Clean start, clear phone, all of that. You decided. You were ready. But then you started reading your own messages. Not theirs. Yours. And something in the way you used to write to them, the way you asked questions you already knew the answers to, the way you said, "No, it's fine in that specific order. No first. Then it's fine." Like you were convincing both of you at once. Something about it made you stop. You kept scrolling up. Not to find anything. Just up. Past the jokes that were covering something. Past the long paragraph you sent at 2 a.m. that they replied to with, "Haha, yeah." Past the version of you that was working so hard to seem like enough that you never once asked yourself if they were. And past the good morning you sent on a Tuesday that took them until Thursday to respond to. And the way you acted like that was fine. The way you made your peace with it. The way you told yourself people get busy. People have lives. You're not their whole world. All true, all reasonable, all the kinds of things a person tells themselves when the truth is slightly too uncomfortable to hold directly. You didn't delete it. You just put the phone down and looked at the ceiling. And the ceiling didn't say anything. Ceilings don't. But in that particular silence, something landed. Not loudly, not like a revelation. More like when your eyes finally adjust and you realize the room was never as dark as you thought. You weren't reading their words. You were reading what you had quietly become around them. And the person in those messages, trying that hard, shrinking that carefully, editing themselves that consistently, you don't even recognize them as you anymore. That's not a small thing. That's the thing. That is the entire thing. Because here's what nobody says about losing someone. Not the dramatic kind of losing. Not the argument or the betrayal or the moment where everything becomes clear in the worst possible way. But the slow kind, the quiet kind. The kind where one day you just both stop pretending the distance isn't there. You stop bringing it up. They stop pretending to close it. And somewhere in the exhausted middle of that, without a conversation or a decision, or even a specific Tuesday, it just ends. Or it becomes something so hollowed out it barely deserves the word anymore. Nobody says that the most painful part isn't their absence. It's the inventory. It's sitting exactly the way you're sitting right now and taking stock of every version of yourself you quietly abandoned in the process of trying to make it work. Every sentence you edited before sending because you already knew how they'd receive the honest version. Every reaction you swallowed, not because you didn't feel it, but because you'd learned the cost of showing it. Every time you felt something shift in your chest during a conversation and chose to address the surface, because the real thing felt too risky to name. You were not just in a relationship with them. You were in a relationship with their comfort level, with what they could hold, with the ceiling they'd placed, without ever announcing it, on how much of you was welcome in the room. And you accepted the ceiling, not because you're weak, but because you wanted it to work. Because there was something real in there, underneath all the misalignment. Something that made the ceiling feel like a temporary thing, a negotiable thing, a thing that would lift as trust grew. And maybe that hope was genuine. Maybe it was warranted once. But somewhere along the way, the ceiling stopped being something you were waiting to see lifted and became something you'd stopped looking at altogether. You just lowered your head, kept walking, kept trying, kept being half of yourself and calling it reasonable. Ya Allah, I don't even know when I stopped being myself. That sentence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with weight or clarity or any of the emotional markers that would make it easy to recognize as important. It arrives quietly, the way most true things do. Usually in a moment exactly like this one. Late, alone, looking at a screen that's showing you something you weren't prepared to see. And this is where it gets deeper than you expected. This is where the moment stops being about them. Because that movement, the thumb going to their name before the mind made a choice, the scrolling without intention, the not deleting, that wasn't weakness. That wasn't you being stuck or pathetic, or unable to move forward the way everyone keeps gently suggesting you should. That was something inside you, something older and quieter than your rational mind, refusing to let you bypass what still needed to be felt. There is a pull in the human self, in the nafs, in that deep and complicated interior that none of us fully understands, that is almost gravitational. It does not care about your decision to move on. It does not respond to timelines or logic, or the well-meaning advice of people who care about you, but have never been inside what you are carrying. It only cares about what's unresolved. And what was unresolved wasn't them. It was you. The you that got buried somewhere in the middle of trying to be enough for someone who was never going to say you were. The you that existed before this specific dynamic taught you to brace. Before their silences started carrying meaning. Before you learned the particular exhaustion of caring more than you were being cared for, and finding ways to make that feel like virtue rather than imbalance. That version of you is still there. Quieter now, a little tired, carrying something it was never supposed to carry alone. But still there. And the reason you can't fully close this chapter, the reason the conversation is still on your phone, the reason certain songs still catch, the reason you can go weeks feeling fine, and then one unremarkable Wednesday, something small happens, and it's suddenly not fine. The reason isn't that you miss them the way you think you do. It's that you miss yourself. The self that existed before you started measuring your worth through their responses. Before you learned to read their tone like weather, scanning for warmth, bracing for cold, always slightly monitoring, never fully at rest. Before the version of you that once walked into rooms without calculating how you'd be received got replaced by this more careful, more guarded, more exhausted version who does the math before almost every interaction. You stopped trusting yourself somewhere in that relationship. Probably not all at once, probably not in a single identifiable moment, but incrementally, quietly, over the course of 100 small adjustments, each one reasonable in isolation, each one a response to something real. You handed over the pen. You stopped being the author of your own interior reality and became instead a careful reader of theirs, trying to understand what they needed, trying to anticipate what would land wrong, trying to be the version of yourself that caused the least friction, required the least explanation, asked for the least. And you became very good at it. That's the part that sits uncomfortably. Not the pain. The pain is expected. The pain makes sense. But the competence. How skilled you became at making yourself smaller without ever seeming like you were doing it. How naturally the editing came. How the performing of okay became indistinguishable from actually being okay until you couldn't tell the difference yourself. When did you stop being able to tell the difference? You're sitting with that question now, and it's not comfortable. It shouldn't be. Comfort is not what this moment is for. This moment is for honesty. And the honest thing, the thing you've been circling without landing on, is that what you're grieving is layered. Yes, you're grieving them. Of course you are. That loss is real, and it deserves space. But underneath that, heavier and less acknowledged, you're grieving time. You're grieving the months or years you spent in something that was asking more of you than it was giving. You're grieving the conversations you didn't have because you'd already predicted the response. You're grieving the needs you didn't name because naming them felt like a burden, and you'd told yourself a long time ago that being a burden was the thing you most didn't want to be. You're grieving the version of you that was full and uncalculating and completely present before this specific relationship quietly taught you that those qualities needed to be rationed. That is a complicated grief. It doesn't have a clean shape. It doesn't fit the standard narrative of loss, where you miss someone, and then slowly you miss them less, and eventually the sky looks normal again. This grief doubles back. It implicates you. It asks questions about your own choices, your own patterns, the things you participated in that you'd rather not look at directly. It is grief that requires a level of honest self-examination that most people will do anything to avoid, including staying in motion, staying busy, staying distracted, staying slightly numb. Because the examination, when it comes, requires you to hold two things at once that feel contradictory. You loved genuinely, and you lost yourself in the loving. Both things are true. Neither one cancels the other. And sitting with that, truly sitting with it, not fixing it, or reframing it, or rushing to the lesson, is one of the most quietly difficult things a person can do. So let yourself do it, because Allah, and this is not a comfort offering, this is not the spiritual version of it'll all work out. This is something more specific and more demanding. Allah does not bring you to a moment of this kind of clarity to leave you in it. He brings you here because something in you is ready to see what you've been unable to see while you were still inside it. And what you're seeing, this inventory, this recognition of the person you became around them, is not a verdict. It is not evidence that you are broken or too much or not enough or any of the things the worst versions of your own internal voice have tried to convince you of during the quietest hours. It is the beginning of the return. In the language of the heart, in the oldest understanding of what it means to be human, there is a process that is less like healing and more like remembering, like finding your way back to something that was always true about you but got covered over by circumstance, by the wrong relationships, by your own fear, and by the accumulated weight of trying to belong somewhere. You were slowly being asked to disappear inside. You were not built to disappear. That version of you that showed up completely, that texted first, that extended grace past the point where grace was being reciprocated, that chose generosity when suspicion would have been more defensible, that kept believing in the potential of something long after the evidence stopped supporting the belief. That version wasn't foolish. That version was not wrong for being who it was. That version was just in the wrong container. And Allah saw all of it. Every adjustment you made, every need you talked yourself out of, every night you went to sleep with something unresolved because raising it felt like too much to ask, like more than the fragile equilibrium of what you'd built together could hold without cracking. Allah saw you making yourself smaller in spaces that should have been large enough to hold you exactly as you were. And He did not look at that and call it devotion. He called it waste, not of you, of the gift that is you, of the specific, unrepeatable combination of qualities that exists only in you, your particular way of caring, your specific texture of loyalty, the thing you bring to the people you love that no one has a name for, but everyone can feel, being poured into something that could not hold it properly and kept losing it through the cracks. He said, "Enough." Not in anger, in precision, in the way that a surgeon removes something not to cause harm but to end it, in the way that a flood clears land not to destroy but to prepare, in the way that a long winter is not a punishment but a process. Everything that needed to die, dying, so that what comes next can come in clean. Their departure was not indifference, it was architecture. and you've been standing in the rubble calling it the end, when Allah has been walking through it, calling it the foundation. Not everyone who is removed from your life was taken from you. Some of them were taken for you. Sit with that difference. Don't rush past it. Let it do what it's trying to do. Because the alternative, the version where you spend the next year measuring your worth by why they left, trying to reverse engineer what you should have been, what you should have said, what version of yourself might have made them stay. That path leads nowhere that resembles healing. It leads to a very sophisticated, some very exhausting form of staying exactly where you are. Moving around inside the same room, rearranging the furniture, telling yourself you're renovating when you're just maintaining a space you've already outgrown. You have already outgrown this. You outgrew it before it ended. Maybe that's part of what made it so hard, that some part of you knew, months or even years before the actual ending, that this specific thing had a ceiling and you were already pressing against it. That the version of you continuing to grow was going to come into direct conflict with what the relationship required you to remain. And for a long time, you chose the relationship. You told yourself growth was selfish, that asking for more was unreasonable, that the right thing to do was to be patient and present and faithful to what you'd built. But there is a difference between patience and paralysis. And there is a difference between faithfulness and self-erasure. And slowly, quietly, without announcement, you began to understand that difference. Not in a way you could articulate, in the way that the body understands things before the mind catches up. That vague exhaustion that had nothing to do with how much sleep you got. That half sleep where you'd wake at 3 a.m. not knowing why, just knowing something felt wrong. That slight heaviness before conversations with them, a heaviness you explained away. A heaviness you refused to examine directly, because examining it directly would have required making a decision you weren't ready to make. Your deeper self was telling you something was wrong, and you kept quieting it, because the familiar ache of staying felt more manageable than the unfamiliar terror of leaving. Because at least in what you knew, you understood the contours of the pain. You knew where the sharp edges were. You'd learned to move around them without cutting yourself too badly. And that knowledge, that careful, hard-won map of a relationship's most difficult geography, felt like something. It felt like investment. Like if you left now, all that learning would be wasted. But that's not how it works. None of that learning is wasted. Not a single moment of it. Every sharp edge you learned to navigate, you learned something about yourself in that navigation. Every time you chose grace when resentment would have been easier, that was character being built. Every time you stayed present when distance would have been safer, that was your heart demonstrating its own depth to you. You weren't wasting yourself in the trying. You were learning, the hard and costly way, what you are actually made of. And what you are made of is more than what you've been offered. More than the conversations that stayed surface level because depth felt dangerous. More than the love that came with conditions attached that were never fully spoken. More than the belonging that required you to leave parts of yourself at the door. You are made of something that requires space to fully exist, and space is exactly what Allah is creating. This is the thing about divine removal that is genuinely difficult to accept. Not because it isn't true, but because accepting it fully requires a kind of faith that costs something. It requires trusting that the one who took something away can see further than your grief. It requires believing that loss is not always loss, that sometimes what looks like subtraction is actually the calculus of abundance, the universe making room. It requires sitting inside an emptiness that your hands keep wanting to fill, and choosing not to fill it. Choosing instead to let it be empty for long enough to understand what it's empty of and whether you actually want to put the same things back. Because here is what that empty space is asking you. Not how do I get back what I had, but who do I want to be now that I am not defined by what I was holding? That is the real question. And it's a question that cannot be answered while you're still reaching backward. It can only be answered by turning around, fully, without the hedge of keeping one eye on the door and looking at what's ahead. What's ahead is not clear yet. That's honest. Allah does not always illuminate the full path. Often, He gives enough light for one step and asks you to take it in the trust that the next step will become visible once you do. And that kind of trust, taking a step into genuinely uncertain ground, not performing certainty you don't feel, but moving anyway, because you have chosen to believe that the one who made you would not guide you somewhere designed to destroy you. That kind of trust is not the soft, comfortable faith that comes easily. It is the hard faith, the real faith, the faith that actually means something because it has been tested. You are in the testing, and the testing is not punishment, it is selection. It is Allah looking at everything you carry and everything you're capable of and saying, I know what I made you for, and what I made you for is not this. So let this go. Not because it wasn't real, not because it didn't matter, not because you're supposed to feel nothing about it, but because holding it is costing you something you cannot afford to spend. The present, the now, the version of yourself that is alive in this actual moment, trying to build something real, trying to become someone real, trying to show up to a life that is still full of possibility, no matter what it feels like, from inside this specific grief. Let it go the way you let out a long breath. Not forced, not performative. Just release. And in the space that it leaves, in that particular quiet that follows genuine release, not suppression but actual putting down, something will begin. Not loudly, not dramatically, not the way it happens in the stories people tell each other about how they got through it, but quietly, slowly, in the ordinary texture of days that slowly start to feel lighter, in mornings that don't begin with the weight of what's unresolved, in moments of genuine rest, real rest, the kind where your whole self is present in the stillness instead of one part of you always somewhere else. In conversations with people who ask how you are and actually wait for the answer, and you realize with something like surprise that you have a real answer to give. That is what is being built, not a replacement, not a rebound in any form, emotional, relational, spiritual, a foundation, something load-bearing, and something that can hold the actual weight of who you are without cracking. And the people who come into that, the people Allah places in the path of the version of you that is no longer willing to make itself smaller, that has learned the cost of that particular sacrifice and refused to pay it again. Those people will be different. They will be different, because you will be different, because the relationship you have with yourself will be different, because you will arrive into connection no longer carrying the silent desperation of someone who needs it to work, needs it to hold, needs it to confirm that they are worthy of being stayed for. You will arrive already knowing you are worthy, not in the abstract, not in the motivational poster sense, but in the lived, embodied, unattested sense, the knowing that comes not from being told, but from having gone through something and come out the other side still yourself, still capable of love, still willing to show up, but doing it now from fullness instead of hunger, from choice instead of need. That is the version of you that is being prepared. And the preparation is happening right now, in this exact moment. In the sitting with something uncomfortable instead of running from it. In the willingness to read those old messages and feel what they bring up instead of deleting them before the feeling can land. In the choosing, even tonight, to be honest with yourself about what happened instead of constructing a more comfortable narrative. This is the work. Not the grand gestures, not the dramatic breakthroughs, the quiet, daily, unglamorous work of being honest with yourself when the easier option is always available. This is what builds a person. This is what Allah is doing in the spaces that used to be occupied by something that is no longer there. He is building you in the only way that things of real and lasting value are ever built. Slowly, from the inside, layer by layer, through pressure and time, and the willingness of the material to be shaped. You are the material, and you are not finished. You are not even close to finished. And the day will come. It will not feel dramatic when it arrives. There will be no music, no obvious moment of transformation. The day will come when you will pick up your phone and scroll to that conversation and feel almost nothing. Not emptiness, not numbness, just distance. The natural distance of someone who has genuinely moved from one place to another. Not because they forced it, but because they grew. And you will delete the conversation. Not in pain, not as an act of closing, not as a thing you need to perform to prove to yourself that you're over it, just because it's time. Because the person in those messages, the one trying so hard, shrinking so carefully, editing themselves so consistently, you won't need to carry them anymore. Not because you're ashamed of them, but because you've already done what they couldn't do. You became someone who stayed. You stayed for yourself, even when they didn't. And that, quietly, without announcement, on some unremarkable evening that will feel like any other evening, will be enough. More than enough. They walked away. Allah stayed. And in the silence after, He began writing the version of you that required all of that to become real. You won't understand it fully yet. That's okay. Some things are only legible in hindsight. But the understanding is already beginning. Right now, in this moment, in the fact that you are still here, still willing to feel it, still choosing not to look away. That's not weakness. That is exactly what being rebuilt looks like.